Hello, George.
Oh, yes, sir.
George, I believe you grew up in Darlinghurst.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, well, what street did you live in?
Neil Avenue and Lawson Street, right on the corner in Paddington. It's Paddington, but it's on the cusp of Darlinghurst. I used to go to Darlinghurst Public School, infant school.
What year were you born in?
57.
And what kind of a kid were you?
What kind of a kid was I? Oh, geez, that's a hard question to explain, I guess. I wasn't a bad kid. Although in those days it wasn't hard to be bad, it wasn't hard to be good either. But I was just an average run-of-the-mill kid.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
4 sisters, yeah, all older than me.
And what are your earliest memories?
My earliest memories of living down there, of going to school there. Well, I don't remember being born, of course, but although I was born in the Royal Women's Hospital in Paddington, then I remember living in Cascade Street for a little while. Then we lived up in Five Ways, then moved down the bottom to Lawson Street, Neil Avenue. Earliest memories, school days, I suppose, hanging around with kids, being, walking around safely on the streets, not worrying about what time you got home, going out with your friends. Whereas these days, you wouldn't let your child walk around like we used to in the afternoons after school and things like that, I guess. That's probably some of the earliest memories, I don't know.
What kind of houses did you live in?
Terrace. Mine was a corner terrace. It was a shop, actually. My parents used to own a corner store. But it was a double terrace. And the rest of the street were single terraces, except for further up. They were a bit different.
Were your parents renting or did they own it?
No, they owned it. My father bought the property in the early 60s. 61, I think, 62, something like that.
And what kind of, was it a general sort of...
Yeah, a little corner store, yeah.
And what was the neighbourhood like then? Who were the people that lived there?
In those days, well, back then, early 60s, it was a lot different than what it is now. A lot different than what it is now. It was a lot more family orientated, a lot more ethnic groups. There was a lot of Greeks, a lot of Portuguese, Italians, but a lot of families, and basically they were working class people and they used to work for a living. Whereas now, Paddington, Darlinghurst, it's all changed completely.
What are the names of some of the families you can remember?
What I can remember? I remember the Roses. A couple with their mum, they used to live with their mum on their own, Greg and Russell Rosa. Lawson, Peter Lawson's. I used to basically hang around. I guess I didn't hang around with too many people because I've got Greek heritage, although I was born here. And I hung around with a lot of Aussies, I suppose, because that's what basically, in my age group, was around those times. So we grew up, in a pretty normal atmosphere.
Was it a pretty happily mixed neighbourhood?
Yeah, it was. Very happy, actually. There wasn't, it was a good neighbourhood then. You knew nearly everybody around the place. You knew the old ladies, the younger people, the kids, the parents. And it was a happy-go-lucky neighbourhood, but they were all, good, solid, working-class people.
Did you see that neighbourhood change?
Yes, I did. Because I lived there for quite a while. I lived there for quite a few years, and I saw it change and grow and expand, and the prices skyrocket, and the type of people change, and everything else happened to it.
When did that start to occur?
As far as I remember now, probably in the early 70s, sometime.
And with all the people that were living there, where did they move to?
Well, a lot that I know a lot of them had moved out to the west, out of the original people that were there when I was there. They moved out to the western suburbs. Well, we can edit it, can't we? Places like Revesby, and in those days that was a long way away. Burwood, that was a long way away. Whereas now, with all the new roads and everything, it's only a 15-20 minute drive.
Were people happy to leave? Because was that sort of viewed as a depressed neighbourhood then?
Yes, it was. So they were happy to get out and go out to the suburbs where they had a big backyard and plenty of room for their kids and everything. It was a depressed suburb. Actually, I think that's how come we ended up buying there in the first place, because of the prices. Because my father, initially, there was a recession on 59, 60, and up until then he was in property and he was doing well. He had a block of flats at Randwick, he had a dozen houses in Paddington, he owned a couple others somewhere else, and then during the recession he went bankrupt and he ended up with just enough to get the deposit on the place that we had down in Paddington. And that's probably why, because of the prices then. It wasn't exactly a high-flying area. And so he was a bit unlucky, and ever since then he's been, because that was during, I think, Harold Holt's era, I can't remember now. He's been very anti-liberal ever since. I don't blame him. I never wanted to be rich, I just wish my father was.
Yeah. Did your parents talk politics much at home?
My father did, yeah. My mother didn't, but my father did, because he was involved in it. He was in the Labor Party for quite a while.
What branch was that?
Paddington. And I guess because of what happened to him, so he was, very, very politically motivated to try and get even with the Liberals whenever he could. I think these days he's changed a bit and mellowed, but in those days I guess you can't blame him. I mean, he just started to do well, and then he got hit on the head, and he never quite recovered.
And had the whole economy gone? Had something
Well,
special
it was
happened?
a recession. It was a recession then. It was worse than the one we had now. So it was pretty bad at the time. Yeah, because the whole economy had just gone to the pack.
And what was it like at home at that time?
Well, things were... that was just when I'd started to remember things, I guess. So I don't remember a lot about the times before that, because I don't think I'd started school yet. But I knew then, because then I could tell we had newer cars and things like that. Then all of a sudden things changed, and they were backwards for quite a while. I mean, they didn't improve for a while anyway. But eventually, through hard work, like my father used to work 2 or 3 jobs. Mum used to run the shop, and he'd be a cab driver, an electrician, and real estate, and anything he could to try and get by. So he worked hard. He worked hard.
When did your parents come to Australia?
Must have been early 50s, I think, about 1952, roughly.
And do you know why they where did they live in Greece? What part of
Well,
Greece?
my parents are from an island called Ikaria, which is out near the Turkish coast on that side. And they migrated here, I guess, because it was a lucky country. Things were tough back there too. It was just after the Depression and the war. Dad had been through the war, and my grandfather had come over to Australia in the very, very early 1900s. He stayed for a while, then he went back, and he came back here. He was here before the Depression. He was here, and he had a little farm out in the country, a place called Uralla. And eventually, because my mum had 4 brothers, they came, so Mum came along and brought Dad with her to try and get a better life. Whether it was better or not, I don't know, but that's the way it worked out.
And can you remember at home growing up much talk about that? About the wisdom of their decision?
No, I remember nothing about that. No, we never really, I guess family life might have been different. It was, in those days it was a case of, the child being seen and not heard. It wasn't like it is today, where you talk to your kids and you tell them about things and about your past and about whatever else. In those days, well, Dad used to have to work, so he had to work, and Mum was running the shop and cleaning up and looking after 4 kids, 5 kids, and so I didn't get much time for communication with your parents. Like, that's the one thing I remember about it, basically, is that I never remember having time to, or my dad having time to take me out to, have a game of cricket or just hit a ball around or kick a ball or something. Whereas it's something I make sure I make up with my son now. Every 5 minutes we're playing with each other, we're doing something. I guess you learn from the sins of the father.
Were your parents religious?
No, not really. Not really. Mum would go to church on Sundays. Dad was very, I wouldn't say anti-religion, but he was anti-church. He didn't like the brainwashing that they used to, his so-called brainwashing that they used to try and do. So he wasn't a religious man.
And what church did your mum attend?
Mum used to go to St Sophia in Darlinghurst, just up in South Dowling Street. I was christened there, So I decided to get married there, and I christened my kids there for some reason.
So when you could remember you can remember from the 50s.
Vaguely. Well, in the 50s, you've got to remember I was born in 57, so I was only 3 or 4.
So we really 60s.
More 60s, very early 60s, yeah. Well, not early 60s, but 60s. Because I remember we moved to the shop and I just started kindergarten because I was originally going to Glenmore Road. We lived in Five Ways up in Glenmore Road, and I was going to Glenmore Road School. Then we moved down to down the shop, and I had to move to Darlinghurst Public, which was so I must have been 4.5. So that would have been 61, I suppose.
And what can you remember from when you first started
From school? Oh, I remember lots. I remember that's why I never liked teachers. I was in kindergarten. And my kindergarten teacher, I don't know what I did wrong, whether I talked in class or something. And if you think of it these days, having a 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid stand there with his legs apart, and you grab one of those 16-inch rulers and whack it between his legs as hard as you can go. Now, in those days, well, it was nothing, I guess. But that's why I suppose I never aspired at much in school, because that's what I remember. That's what my teachers were like to me.
Really?
Because I was only 4.5, 5 years old, and here she is, bang, 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 you know, and that was the punishment. She meted out.
Between your legs?
Yeah, between your legs. And since then, you don't, you know, that's why what's going on now with the anti-punishment, sure, when you're in high school, you get the cane, fair enough, you've done something wrong. But what does a 5-year-old understand? What does a 5-year-old know? You know, you've got to talk to them.
And was that a state school?
Yeah, it was Darlinghurst Public School. And
did you have physical punishment at home?
No.
So
In all the years, I remember my father kicking me once or something, that was about it. And that was just up the backside, I must have done something wrong.
So that must have been a pretty big shock.
Well, it was traumatic. It was traumatic at the time, as far back as I can remember.
Did you tell your parents?
No, I don't think I did. No, it's very stoic.
Did that... we were talking about the punishment. So it must have been a terrible shock for you when you had that kind of experience. Was it often, or was that just one particular...
Oh, no, it happened a few times, I guess. It was a terrible shock, but it wasn't that bad. I mean, things were different then. You don't, you know... I mean, I wasn't traumatised by it or anything like that. It hurt, sure, it hurt at the time, as far back as I remember, but... So we used to call the teacher names and things. That was it. I mean, I can't even remember her name. I think it was Mrs. Westcott or something like that. Silly old bat.
Did it happen to other kids as well?
Yeah. It did happen to other kids too. But it was at the time, you got to think too, Darlinghurst was a rough school. I mean, back then in the early 60s, because I must have left there in about 69, I think, to go to high school, it was a rough school. Darlinghurst was still a rough area then.
What made it rough?
The type of people that lived there, I guess, that lived around there, you know, in the surrounding streets. I mean, it was still just out of King's Cross. Maybe there was a lot of single mothers, maybe there was a lot of, you know, where the fathers used to have a drink and have a bit of an alcohol problem or something, because it was very inner city, very small houses. And it was a working class area, but it was a rough area then.
Where did most people work?
Where did they work? Well, there was, I guess, that's a very hard question, I don't know. I know, just going off a few friends of mine that were at school, there was a couple of cab drivers, there was electricians, there was factory workers, their fathers and mothers worked in factories. You know, a lot of things like that, I suppose.
And can you remember any industries that were around the place?
Around there? Yeah, there was a tyre factory down the road from my place, used to make tyres. I don't think it's still there anymore. And what else? I mean, it's a semi-industrial area anyway. It's changed now, of course. But in those days, I was too young to really notice. I remember the tyre factory because of the smell. Because it used to emit, you know, you see the black smoke coming out and you could smell the tyres burning, the rubber burning. So that was pretty fancy, I guess. But going back to the school, I know it was rough because I know like how a couple of guys ended up that, you know, went through school there. I know a couple of them were murdered, and a few have ended up in jail, and 2 or 3 are policemen, so it was sort of that sort of a school. Really, a lot of knockabouts.
And you say it was a really mixed ethnic sort of community. How were you treated at school at that? I mean, that was in the days before we had a multicultural policy.
Yeah, it was, that's right. Well, in those days, I tell you, things were fine. They were, I guess, maybe for other people of ethnic origin who had more of an accent, who didn't speak English, so like my parents could speak English pretty well, although they had a bit of an accent. Of course, I was born here, so I didn't have one. For me, it was fine. I think all through school, even through high school, I remember getting called a wog once when someone said a derogatory. Otherwise, between your friends, you know, I'd say the same thing. But I think all through, even my high school years, only once it ever happened to me where it was in a derogatory way. So really, going back then, well, it wasn't so much racist. I suppose maybe European, you were different because you were European, you were white, your religion wasn't a lot different, you looked the same, you talked the same. So they didn't really have too much to pick on you for. But I guess if you looked different and you didn't speak the language, and you know, and that's where it made a difference.
Did you? Who are your friends? Who are your best mates?
I had a lot of Aussies who were my best mates. Actually, most of them were. There was one guy. His father was, or his grandfather was Greek, because his father couldn't speak Greek at all. A couple of others are Australians. I had a Spanish friend, but he was born here too. Basically Australians.
Did you go to each other's houses?
Yeah, we used to visit each other, you know, after school or on the way home or on a weekend or something like that. We just wander the streets with each other and get on our pump-up scooters in those days. Didn't have bikes, ride them around the place. And with no fear. You know, you'd go around collecting bottles, for instance, because in those days you get a deposit on the bottles and on the wooden cases they used to come in, and you could make a fortune. And we'd be out till 6, 7 in the evening with no fear. And then, you know, we were maybe did that from, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Whereas nowadays you wouldn't let your 8-year-old out on the street on their own.
And how far did you roam?
Oh, we roamed a while. Well, from where I lived, geez, I remember going up to Edgecliff and up the other end of Darlinghurst towards the Cross. And in those days, even the Cross was safer. Well, the Cross was, I guess, it's not now, but in those days it was pretty safe. Because during the day it had more of a bohemian atmosphere about it. It wasn't like it is now, just full of drug dealers and sex shops and things like that. And you felt safe walking around. But we used to go to Rushcutters Bay Park, which was just down the bottom, and stay there till all hours. Or we'd go for a swim out at Redleaf Pool, the old Redleaf Pool, and stay there till 5 or 6, 7 o'clock at night and come back home. And you didn't, you know, it didn't matter. You weren't going to get taken off the street. You weren't going to get attacked. You weren't going to get... So things were fine. Cracker nights, geez, what a great night that used to be. Remember the old with tuppenny bungers and the penny bungers and things like that? We'd build a bonfire up the end of the street. Of course, we'd block the street off during the day, and all the kids in the neighbourhood would congregate, and we'd all find whatever we could to add to the bonfire. And the thing would be massive, it would be 20 foot tall.
What street was that?
That was just in Stephen Street. Not Stephen Street, no. Dillon Street. And we'd make this huge bonfire, so the street would be closed off, and then at night, all the kids, plus their families, their mothers, their fathers would come up. You know, we'd have a great fun just throwing our crackers in there and letting off skyrockets and things like that. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, that's a pity that that's gone. And there was never, you know, they started complaining they banned the firecrackers, the fireworks, because of so-called accidents. Well, I never remember seeing any. I was 5 and 6 and 7 and throwing these tuppenny bungers around that were like pieces of dynamite. So, you know, I don't know, maybe they had 1 or 2 accidents to silly kids that didn't know how to use them anyway. But that's something that my kids will miss. I've seen it, they'll miss it. And they were, the nearest they get to see fireworks is they go down Darling Harbour, and you know, which is not the same.
Yeah.
Cut it off. Oh.
You know how you were saying you could roam around, and that was safe. Did anything ever happen to you when you were going? It really was safe. You never met any.
Well, once. I remember once I was coming back from. I was down Rushcutters Bay Park, I think, and I'd gone to see. Might have been, what was his name? Sir Francis Chichester. he bought that raft in or something that he'd sailed around the world in, and they had that down at Rushcutters Bay Park. And I was coming back on my own, because we spent a lot of time down that park. And I was coming up Neild Avenue, and once it was a ute, and I remember it well, because a utility with this guy pulled over next to me. He said, "Do you want a lift? I know your parents," or something. Now I must have been 9 or 10 then, but I was awake enough to look at him and know I don't know this man, so I took off like a rocket. But that's the only thing I ever remember from those days.
And do you remember any sort of local identities or characters, people that were well known in the area?
In the area then, yeah, well, there must have been a few. I do remember, I tell you what I do remember about it. In those days there was a lot of gangs roaming around, a bit like there is now, I suppose. There was a Paddo gang, there was Sharpies, there were skinheads, and they used to get a bit rough sometimes too. I remember once must have been a big brawl, because all of a sudden from the Darlinghurst side, about 50 guys come running past me, past the shop, and they had their baseball bats out and bits of 4x2, and they took off up Lawson Street. I never know what happened. I never found out what happened or who they were chasing or something, but I was glad that I wasn't around at the time.
And how old were the members of those?
Well, they must have been, because I was only 9 or 10, I guess they were probably 15, 16. Although to me they would have looked 40, I guess, and huge. But apart from characters, well, it's a bit hard to remember any names, I guess, in those days.
Did your family, you know, where you had Aussie friends home and Spanish friends? And
well, I did. My parents was a different story. They mixed with a lot of Greeks. I remember there, because the shop was like a little focal point, nearly every weekend Dad would have friends over, and they'd be, you know, he'd have a dozen or so friends, couples, wives and husbands. They'd sit around the table and have a few drinks, and you'd hear singing and, you know, then carrying on, and they'd have fun, they'd have lots of fun. But they were my parents, and I mean, they used to mix with a lot of Greeks, I suppose, but it never seemed to rub off on me.
And did you bring friends home? Was it common to bring friends home for dinner or for the weekend, or did people...
Not so much for the weekend, but it was common to come home and, you know, and they'll hang around and ring up and say they're staying at my place for dinner or something like that, to have something to eat there. Yeah, that was very common.
And were they happy to eat Greek cuisine?
Yeah, they were happy. They were very happy. They would have eaten anything, I guess, a bit like me. Well, I wasn't very Greek because I didn't like Greek food. I was more of a steak and chips man. So I'd get that nearly every night.
Thinking about when you got older, say when you were I don't know, 14 or 15, were you expected to sort of get a job or sell papers or contribute to the family in any way?
Well, I used to work in the shop to help out after school, on weekends, things like that, I guess.
And that would have been expected?
Yeah, that was expected. I used to have a few fights with my father when I wanted to go out. But we got over that, I suppose. I mean, I thought I had to work too hard compared to what my friends did. But, well, that's what happens.
What were the hours of the shop they would have been?
Long hours, 7 till 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night, 7 in the morning, 7 days a week. You know, we used to close up on Sundays for a few hours and just go down to Nielsen Park for a bit of a picnic, or, you know, just a swim or something like that, or go out to La Perouse. I remember going out to La Perouse, and my mum used to collect, they had like, it's not grass because it's edible, it's a bit like spinach. I don't know what sort of spinach it is. And it used to grow wild at La Perouse. They would go out there for a drive, and, you know, they'd be out there collecting this and bring it home. I can't remember what it tastes like. I don't think I was very big on my vegetables.
What did your family do much as a family for fun?
No, we didn't really get a chance to. Not with the shop.
How long did they have that shop for?
Well, my father still owns the property now.
And what was it called, by the way?
Chris's Corner.
Oh, right.
It's quite a landmark down there, actually, because there's been Chris's Corner for quite a while. There's prints. I've seen prints in shops about it. It's been in magazines. They'd filmed a couple of commercials there. It is quite a landmark, I suppose. I don't think he'll ever sell it. Been trying to get him to sell it for you. The business is leased out at the moment. Been trying to get him to sell it, but no, he just He likes the building too much and the name.
You know how before you said, oh, well, most of the houses were pretty small there, but there's some really large sort of...
Oh, there is some large houses, yes, but the ones immediately on the right of my place are very tiny. Up Neald Avenue way, yeah, there's some big houses up there, sure.
And were they occupied by working people?
Those days, well, I remember, I think one of the top ones in Neald Avenue used to be occupied by Edmund Capon once. So if you could call him a working class, I don't know. But and the others.
When you were growing up, though, he wouldn't.
That was when I was growing up. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that was. Yeah, but he was already doing something there. And the others. See, a lot of them were split up too. There was a lot of the houses that had been split into boarding houses or made small flats out of. Even right across the road, there's 3 huge terraces, but they're split. The one in the middle is 3 flats or 4 flats. The other 2 have been divided into 2 with upstairs and downstairs, and that's always been the go for them.
Did families have a lot of kids in those days?
Yeah, they did. They did. Not like now, not 2.1, that's for sure. And there was, most families had 3, at least 3 or 4.
Were there places like sort of, boarding houses and bed sits and that sort of thing in the area?
Around there, yeah, Paddington, there was. Actually, there was a lot of bed sits around there.
So as well as the families, would you have had sort of, single sort of bohemian...
Like transient types?
Yeah, auntie types?
Yeah, well, auntie types, as far as I don't know how much I don't even remember seeing B. Smith. I guess there was, I don't know.
But they weren't a feature of your life?
They weren't a feature of my life, no.
Your parents worked really hard and everything, but for them was it a happy life, or were they...
Well, I guess they were happy because they had their children around them, they had their family around them. They'd get their friends over, like I said, on weekends or, during the week. They get a lot of visitors. So for them it was basically happy. I pity my poor mother, how hard she had to work compared to my father.
Why was that? Why?
Well, she was the one that was in the shop all the time. She had the kids to look after. You always had clean clothes when you wanted to go out. Your school clothes were done, your lunches were done. And she's the one that did it all in between the shop, running that shop for 16 hours a day.
So how did she manage it?
Very strong woman. That's all I can say. She's a very strong woman. She still is today. But I remember her sitting down a few times and, whether it be the afternoon, if you gave her a little bit of a break, or later on that night, she'd sit down and she'd close her eyes, she'd be asleep in a flash. Even if it was a 10-minute sleep. And she'd be up at 5 in the morning again to get prepared for the next day. She's a hell of a woman, my mother.
But was the shop sort of like a social place too?
It was, yeah. In those days, a corner store was a corner store. It was not like it is, now there's virtually none left, or at this rate there won't be any left, the way the supermarkets are going anyway. They want to wipe them out, which they'll do. A couple of years' time, there won't be too many left. But it was very social. You knew everybody.
Did your mother know most of the people?
Yeah, she knew everybody, that came in. By first name, by Christian name, by second name. Melbourne Cup time, she'd run a sweepstake and she'd fill it up 3-4 times over, that sort of thing. Yeah, it was a lot different. You'd run a tab for, nearly everyone had a tab going, or they were on the book or something. And I remember a few times when people, they were down on their luck and Dad would go out there and try to chat up the women, of course, and give them a box of fruit or something to take home. It was a bit like that.
So were they happy with their life?
My parents?
Yeah.
They would have been happier. They could have been happier if what he was doing in the first place had worked out. I guess you take that away from a man, so I don't know how happy he was. We never really discussed it.
But there was no great change in the mood of the family?
There was no great change in the mood of the family, but I guess I'm a lot like him in that respect, that if you're on a certain track and then it doesn't work out that way, well, obviously you're very disappointed with yourself. He never gave up, though. He kept trying. Didn't work, but he kept trying. So whether he was happy inside, that's something else, Like I said, we never discussed it. He was one way and that was it. Yep.
What sort of discipline was employed at home?
Discipline? There was a bit of discipline, nothing drastic. Like I said, my dad kicked me up the backside once because I came home about 8 hours late or something. Mum used to take a slipper off when I did something wrong. I used to cop it on the backside with a slipper. But nothing really, you know, as long as I knew the rules and I played by the rules. They told me to be home at a certain time, I'd be home. I wasn't a bad kid, so I didn't get in trouble with the police or anything like that. Well, I just didn't get caught, put it that way. Apart from things like that, they were pretty good discipline-wise, but basically because I knew right from wrong, I think, and that made a big difference.
And what were some of the things that you could have got into trouble for? What were some of the things that kids did? Everybody does them.
Well, yeah, everybody does them, I suppose, but I don't know. I can't tell you in front of the camera.
Oh, okay.
No, we just...
I've heard some great stories about certain notable people stealing the lead off the church and selling it.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more along the lines of going down Rushcutters Bay Park, the baths. They used to have some baths there right around at Yarranaby Park. And there was the girls section and the boys section, and with a couple of mates, I don't know how old I was, and we found a little hole in the girls section and we could look through and watch them getting changed. Other things like, although we had a shop, I guess some of my mates would go up to another shop up the street and they'd jump the back fence and get the bottles out of there and, you know, do things like that, I suppose.
And sell them back to them?
Sell them back to them. Hubcaps from cars, just nothing nasty. Just fun sort of things. No matter where you lived, I suppose, basically did the same things. Like the kids do now, I mean, you know. But it was more of an air of, you know, it just seemed a lot freer then. Everything seemed to be a lot more, I don't know, I guess, what can you say about it?
What was the change that came about when television, because television, you would remember not television and then you would remember it coming in?
No, I don't remember not television. Well, because I guess when I was so young it didn't matter to me. I didn't watch much of it anyway. I remember black and white TVs, of course. Not television. Well, when did television come out?
So
55.
I
can't remember it. Yeah, so I can't remember back that far.
But most people would have had one, did they?
No, not really. Not really. I remember my sisters telling me that when we lived in Cascade Street, which is a couple of years before that, and the neighbour had got one, and they'd go next door and look through the window and watch a TV, and you know, and fun and games there, and then he'd chase them away and things like that. So they weren't that common. I guess once we got into, I don't remember at Randwick if we had one or not when we lived up there. Once we got down to...
What years are you talking about when you were at Randwick?
Well, I must have only been 2 years old.
Oh, right.
So I was probably 59. Because then the recession came in 60 and that's when he more than likely bought that other place. Yeah, so I don't remember it that much.
So who were your friends? Can you name some of your friends?
From school? I don't know if I'd want to. Well, there was a guy called John Bailey, which actually we had a reunion only a couple of weeks ago, because it's 20 years since we've been out of high school. And I saw him there and a couple of others, Jose Alfonso and Perry Sarin.
And they were all locals?
They're all locals, yeah. They lived in Darlinghurst.
Craig
McDonald. He lived in Darlinghurst. A few other guys that I haven't seen since then, I suppose, at school, that I do remember. I remember John Weary, I remember Miko Zadnik. Although the name was very, very flash, he was born here, even though he had a name like that. A few of the girls, there was a Colleen Smith, a Rosemary Pledger, Annalise Sear, I guess. Who else? I don't know.
And when you're with your friends, what were the sort of things that you'd do together?
Oh, we'd probably ride our bikes and tell lies, or our scooters, and that's it, and tell lies about each other, how good we were and things like that. Just have races, play little games. You know, whoever had the newest toy would go around to his place, and remember once one of them had a Morse code set or something, and you know, we set it up playing Morse code from one room to another. That was something flash. And there wasn't a lot of course, because you didn't have computers or anything in those days. So, and we didn't watch a lot of TV. I remember going home, I used to love watching Zorro, making the sign of the Z. That was a lot of fun. And then you'd go out and play Zorro, of course, later. But there wasn't a lot of TV that we watched, so we made our own entertainment, whatever it happened to be.
Can you remember?
Making billy carts, that's what I remember. You used to make billy carts. and race them down the streets. Tommy Waterhouse, that's another name. I couldn't remember Tommy Waterhouse. He used to live over the road from me. He was a good bloke.
Was it safe enough to race your billy carts down the street?
Yeah, I would come down the hills a million mile an hour.
There weren't that many cars?
There wasn't many cars, but we'd have a cockatoo, I guess. He'd be waiting down the bottom of the hill, and he'd give you directions and tell you whether to come down or not. So you'd have the races, and the cockatoo would be down there saying it's all right, and you could zip down the hill and, you know, make it around the corner before any cars came up. There was a few close calls, of course, but apart from that, you know, the old ball-bearing wheels and make it go fast. Used to get pram wheels or something. We built a billy cart once made out of the old pie boxes, the old timber pie boxes. And these ones were 6 foot long. And this other guy, Bill Veris, that was his name, him and I had made it. And it was a double-decker one. And we used to get about 5 kids in the middle of it. And someone would play cockatoo, and we'd have all the kids, and we'd be, you know, coming down this hill so fast. It's such a steep hill. I mean, if I saw it now, I wouldn't try to do it. But in those days, it didn't matter. If you hurt yourself, you scraped your leg, you cut yourself. Or you didn't think about cars coming up the street and wiping you out or anything.
Were there many accidents?
There were a few, yeah. I remember quite a few, actually, over the years. But then I lived there for a long time, so they probably weren't every couple of weeks, but I remember a few accidents that have happened. Nothing, I don't remember anybody dying. Some bad injuries where the ambulance had to take them away, but nothing spectacular. No injuries with the billy carts, though. This is just cars we're talking about.
Yeah. What can you remember of Oxford Street? Would that have been sort of the main...
The main drag? Yeah, I guess it was. It was still the main drag then. Not a lot, because I guess I didn't really travel up that far, although I used to go to the Police Boys Club up in Underwood Street, Paddington. So from there we'd wander up and down Oxford Street occasionally, although I didn't spend a lot of time there, so I don't remember that much about it.
And what can you remember of the Police Boys Club?
Oh, that used to be a lot of fun. Used to go in there and, you know, we'd in the weights room and do our boxing and wrestling and gymnastics. The boxing was good. We used to spend a lot of time in the gym. What
were the police like?
They were good. They were good. That's why I think I've always had a good rapport with policemen. I've never been one to like a lot of people, they'll walk down the street and call out names and things like that when they're walking past. But because I spent a fair bit of time in the Police Boys Club with the police, I was always pretty good with them. They never, never worried me.
And were you known by the police locally as, you know who your parents were? And did police walk the beat?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I had a couple that knew me. Yeah, the sergeant from up in Paddington and a few others. Yeah, we were sort of known around that way.
If you were being not behaving badly and people knew, that the word would get back to your parents anyway, wouldn't it?
Well, the word would get back to your parents, and I think in those days the police would come down, and the worst they'd do is give you a kick up the backside to try and straighten you up a bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, nowadays if someone tries that, well, they're up for assault and they're up for this and they're up for that. Whereas if you get a 12, 13-year-old that's behaving the wrong way, and if someone in authority does that, I'm not saying, of course, molest them or something. I'm saying give them a kick up the backside and say, now don't do it again. It works a lot of times. It did happen to me once, and it did work. What did I do?
Yeah.
You want to know what I did?
Yeah.
I can't remember. I honestly can't. I just remember getting it.
You're talking about you must have seen the area go from... Tell me about when you noticed the people moving out and the prices going up and everything.
Prices, well...
What time period are we looking at there?
See, it's hard to recall, but you're looking at... I know when we first moved in there, Paddington was considered a slum. And the area wasn't considered good. And then over the years it progressed, I guess, probably 70... Before I left high school, so it had started to improve... because we were there 61, so it had started to improve 69, 70. Then by the time I left high school, which was in 75, Paddington was a great place. Everyone wanted to live there. The guys at school, I remember, they'd say, where you live, Paddington? Oh, it's a good area. It started to get trendy. So I guess between 70 to 74, 75, it really started to change.
Was it ever embarrassing to say that you came from Paddington? Did it ever have that bad a reputation?
It did have, but to my mind, I didn't care because I was brought up there. So you know, I was just a paddo boy. That was it. Didn't worry me what they thought. Actually, I thought it was quite romantic. It was a good reputation to come from paddo. It meant you were tough. You know, back in those days, it was a bit like Balmain. If you came from paddo, you were a toughie because there was a paddo gang and there was this and there was that. So to my mind, the way I was growing up, it was great coming from paddo. It was good.
Were you ever a member of the gang?
No.
And was there ever any sort of rivalry, say, between Paddo kids and Darlinghurst kids, or?
Well, because I was in between both, because I used to go to school at Darlinghurst, not really. You would occasionally get, you know, a few schoolboys from another school coming past and there'd be a fight on, or they'd want to have a fight after school and, you know, you want to get that again?
Yeah. So,
I remember the odd fight happening between, you know, one of the Catholic schools or something like that. But nothing like today. There was no baseball bats or no knives or nothing like that. You know, the rumbles we had rumbles, sure. But they were just your fists and your feet and whatever you could get out with.
Was there sort of rivalry between state schools and Catholic schools?
Not a lot. Not really. Maybe I mixed with the wrong people, I don't know, but I never really saw too much of it. No, the only rivalry we had with schools was when there was a girls' school involved, I guess. That's when the rivalry came into it.
Were there any places that you weren't allowed to go?
As far as my parents banning me, well, they told me to keep away from the cross. But basically not really. It wasn't, you know, it was, because they didn't really know where you were going anyway. I mean, we'd take off to a building site or up the end of Glenmore Road there. It's a whole new little area. Well, it's not new now, but it used to be a quarry. Just under, what's it called? What's it called now? I don't know. Well, it used to be a quarry there anyway. It's under Sutherland Street on this side. We used to go there and play a lot as kids. And if my parents knew, I suppose, because it was pretty dangerous. I mean, there's a lot of deep holes there and things like that. But they never knew, so I didn't bother telling them.
Did they have water in them?
Yeah, they did.
Did you swim?
No, it was mucky. It was yucky. Didn't want to go for a swim in that. No. There was a lot of clay there, so the water would build up, but you wouldn't swim there. Rushcutters Bay, I went in swimming in Rushcutters Bay a few times. Well, I shouldn't have, I guess. That was okay.
Were there people that you had to avoid? You were told to avoid?
Well, I was, you know, I guess as you're growing up, you're told to avoid lots of different types, like the drunks and the bodgies and the rockers.
What's a bodgie?
A bodgie? What is a bodgie? As far back as I can remember, a bodgie was a bloke with big sideburns and a leather jacket. Maybe a motorbike, maybe not a motorbike, but he hung around with his mates. I guess it's just like another term for a little gang member or something like that. But they were bodgies. With a big, what did they call that? Tuft of hair up the front. Can't remember now what it's called.
No.
I used to put it in, I used to knew this one, and he had this big tuft of hair, and he told me to get it that way, he used to get a woman's stocking and put his hair in the stocking when he went to sleep at night, and then take it out in the morning, and of course it'd stick out. But what was it called? I can't remember what they had names for them. I can't remember what they're called now.
And
he was
pointy
a real
shoes.
bodgie. And pointy shoes, yeah. And the stovepipe pants. The skin-tight red shirt. Yeah, that was Gary someone, I can't remember. He was a fair bit older than me. I remember a couple of guys went to, in the late 60s, I guess. They were older than me, of course, but I knew them through the shop, and they were drafted. I went over to Vietnam. One came back, a bit of a scatterbrain, the poor guy. Feel sorry for him. I think one of the others didn't come back. There was 2 or 3. It would have been hard for their families to take.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they were only 18, 19, I guess, getting drafted. And a few more years I would have been there with my luck. I would have been picked. I was lucky I was a few years too young.
But when more wealthier people started to move into the area and the prices were going up, How did the locals feel about that?
Well, they didn't like it. I remember a lot of them didn't like it. They'd complain and say, all these new trendies that are coming in here and, what are they doing to our suburb and things like that. So they didn't like it at all, actually, the original locals that were there. That's probably why a lot didn't stay. Well, then the money was too good to stay anyway, because they were getting too much for their houses. But quite a few people were renting too, and they couldn't afford to stay anymore, because once that started happening, the rent started going up, and the owners saw the prices, so they were selling, and people were buying them and refurbishing them the way they were. So I guess because of that reason, because there was a lot of renters there in the area, they didn't like it one bit.
Because they'd be forced out.
They'd be forced out, which they were forced out. That's why they went out so far, I suppose. Like we were lucky because Dad had put the deposit down. So I managed to get that place, but apart from that, although he didn't get it, my mother did, because he went bankrupt. Still in her name.
What was the focal point of the area?
The focal point of the area, well, it was 5 ways at the time where I lived. It was probably 5 ways. That used to be where all the action was. The pub was up there, and it used to be opposite the pub where there's a supermarket now called Clancy's. I think at one stage that was a surf city, where they used to play bands, because it was a theatre before. Then they had bands in there, and Dad had that, actually. Before he went bankrupt, he had leased that, and upstairs, this is very early 60s, we had all, in the upstairs section you had all little pinball machines and old snooker tables and games, and downstairs you had like a little supermarket he was running. I remember being up there. That was when there was a lot of bodgies around and rockers around, because I'd be up there up the top with him, or one of my sisters would be working behind the bar up there, soft drink bar or drink bar, that's all, not bar, and hanging around there and meeting a lot of them then, like, a couple of guys. They were real rogues, the Rosa brothers. Actually, they should have done well, I think. But they were real rogues. They were what you call characters, And through them you met other ones and other ones and other ones. And because I was a little guy, a lot younger than most that I used to hang out with, well, I used to get looked after all the time, I guess. And then Dad, that's when he went bankrupt and he lost that.
What year was that he went bankrupt?
Well, that would have been 61. And he lost that place, and he lost the houses that he had, because that's when he had houses in Cascade Street and Glenmore Road and Spicer Street and over at Randwick. So he lost everything, and they ended up with, whatever they ended up with.
So he, from the very time that he came to Australia, he was focused around the Paddington, Darlinghurst area.
Yeah. Well, initially he went to, when he first came, I had an uncle in Victoria in a place called Rochester, and he went there and stayed a couple of weeks, and he just had to come to Sydney then. Got to do something about that clip.
It's just because it's too short. That's why. I'm just trying to think what questions to ask that I haven't asked. What's your happiest memory?
My happiest memory? Well, recently or from then?
Yeah, from your childhood.
From my childhood. Geez, I don't know. Can't think of anything too happy.
What time of year did you look forward to most?
Summer, more than likely. Going to the beach or going down the Rascoters Bay to the baths or all the different local pools. Actually, we should go to a lot of the inner city pools. We go to the Domain pool down there, Rascoters Bay baths, Redleaf baths around there.
Where are these Redleaf?
Redleaf's at Rose Bay, Double Bay, up on the hill next to the Wallara Council Chambers. Rascoters Bay baths used to be on Yarranaby Park. That's gone. The Domain's still there. Probably summer, because summer was great, Even before daylight saving, it was still great. Because it was warm and you'd go to the beach and you'd have a bit of fun, and it was a lot better than winter time.
Were you expected to contribute at home in terms of housework?
Not housework, no. But I used to help out in the shop, like I said. I had 4 sisters to do the housework, so I didn't have to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's conditioning. That seems to have grown with me.
What's your saddest memory?
Probably my grandfather passing away, and I was supposed to go the previous night. We were going to the hospital to see him, because he used to live with us for quite a while before he died. And I didn't want to go, so I got my mum to drop me off at the Police Boys Club. And I don't know, she said, no, you should see your grandfather. I said, no, I want to go to the Police Boys Club. So she dropped me off there, and then the next day he passed away. I guess that's probably one of them, because it was a chance that, just to see him one last time. That's probably, that'd be the saddest memory, I guess.
And was that your mother's father?
That was my mother's father, yeah. My father, unfortunately, he was an orphan. His father died, he was only 40 days old. His mother died when he was 6. He had no brothers or sisters, so he was brought up between aunties and grandparents and things like that.
And what's the most, when you think back to your childhood, is there any memory or any image that just jumps into your mind?
From childhood? Rushcutters Bay Park, seeing the big zoos down, not the big zoos, the big circuses that they used to have, because they used to have some great circuses.
What circuses would go there?
In those days, it wasn't Barnum and Bailey, but it was Ashton's, but the original Ashton Circus. And to me then, they were huge. I mean, I've been to a couple recently with my kids, and they just look like little piddly things. But in those days, it was just enormous to go to a circus then. It was a huge thing. Very believable. And going down there again to Rushcutters Bay and watching, seeing that flying moth, or not the flying moth, what was that called? I can't remember now. The guy's raft that had sailed around the world.
Gypsy moth?
Gypsy moth, that was it, yeah.
It was a small boat.
Gypsy moth a third or something like that. Yeah, it was a small boat. Yeah, seeing things like that. 69, my first year of high school, being in the hall at lunchtime and watching Armstrong walk on the moon. I mean, that's why I've got the thing over there, but I remember that well.
Can you remember watching on TV all the anti-Vietnam War demos?
Yeah, I can. Actually, I can, because I knew a couple of people there. I remember seeing Dr. Cairns, going for it in a big way. And I must admit, I was, although I was still a bit young to actually go to war, I had a lot of sympathy for them. I couldn't see why we should have to fight over there against something that clearly wasn't our war. That's not to say that if Australia was involved in something that they had to be involved in, well, I'm Australian, so I'd do my best.
What was the political conversation at that time? Guys were growing long hair, and there were all these demonstrations and images of police dragging people by the hair.
Yeah, there was. One of my cousins got shot, accidentally, mind you. She was only 14 or 15, and there was some sort of demonstration up in Taylor Square. And she was there with my sisters and a couple of other male cousins, and she got shot through the leg. She's still got the mark today.
By who?
By a policeman. He was just shooting in the crowd, and bang, she copped it.
God, what was that? You don't know what
I can't remember what that was, whether it was about the war, I can't remember, but it was some sort of demonstration. And she was just sitting on a fence. Actually, she was not sitting on the fence, she was sitting on a fence just minding her own business, watching all this going on. And she had the bullet.
Well, what was the talk in your family at that time with all this? Because everyone thought that, the rat bags were taking over the world and all that sort of thing.
Well, that's what they thought, I suppose, but then, reds and pinkos and things like that, although at home again, because Dad was, apart from being very anti-liberal, I was lucky in a sense that he was pretty open-minded. Like, he wasn't a religious man, he wasn't, and Mum never tried to influence us. I mean, we'd go to church or at Easter time or Christmas or a wedding or something like that, but that was it. So Dad was pretty open-minded. He was pretty good. I think he got into trouble with the law a couple of times himself.
Did you have long hair?
Yeah.
Did you have to fight in your family to have that?
Yeah. Yeah, Dad used to, he says, I've got 4 daughters already, I don't need another one. And used to cop that all the time and had a cut. But...
Did you have a Beatle cut? No, that you were a bit
well, the Beatles
young.
were in... No, the Beatles came... When did that come? 65, I think.
So you was too young.
I was too young for that, although I did see Paul McCartney live. He came in the shop, actually. Because the Sydney Stadium used to be just down the street. The Sydney Stadium, see, that's something else I remember well. When I forgot about the wrestling down there and the boxing down there. Because as well as our shop, right opposite the stadium there was another shop, and Dad had leased that for a little while. And whenever there was a show on in the stadium, well, I could get in because we had the little shop across the road. So yeah, that was big.
Did you see a lot of?
Yeah, I saw a few things down there actually. I used to go to the wrestling a lot. I used to love that. I saw a couple of boxing matches. I think I went to a couple of concerts down there.
What would have been the concerts?
I don't know I can't remember if I went to JOK. Was that long ago? I can't remember if I went to JOK. My sisters did. I think maybe my sisters did.
And how did Paul McCartney manage to get out and not get mobbed? Because it was real.
Well, this was just in the shop, see. It happened. I'd taken I was sick at home, and maybe they were doing because they stayed up at the Cross, in a hotel up the Cross, and because the stadium was just down the street from my place. And he was in the hire car. Maybe they'd been down to the stadium to do a sound check or something like that. And then on the way back, the hire car stopped right out front of the shop, and he's come in to buy something, see? And then he just got back in the car and away he went, so he didn't have time to
Get mobbed.
or anything. Yeah. Yeah, but that shop was, like I said, the name was well known. We used to have some well-known customers down there. Neville Rand used to come in when he used to live in the area. If you're listening, Neville, you still owe me $1.15 from some kitty litter that he bought and never paid for. He said he'd come back. Noel Brophy used to come in, he used to live around the corner. Junie Little, Gordon Fraser. Off the top of my head, who else can I get? Quite a lot. Elaine Lee, who was in number 96. Pat McDonald, who was in number 96. Bunny Brook had been in there. See, this is all later, I guess. This is probably in the 70s when it started becoming an arty sort of an area. And you'd get, the different type of clientele. And quite a lot of other people you see on TV now, actors and doing commercials and things like that, live around there now, I suppose.
Did the shop change as the clientele changed?
No, not really. Stayed the way it was, I guess. Although it did change in some respects, yeah. My father, when he used to run it, he'd buy anything, doesn't matter what it was, from clothes to dresses to shoes to... Well, that was basically a corner store with food in it, a grocery store. But he'd be the type to go out and buy whatever and bring it in and try and sell it, pots and pans and, and they used to sell those days. But things have changed since then and they don't. I mean, now it's just run as a little corner deli, I guess.
Did on holidays your family?
No. The first holiday they ever had, well, I remember I went overseas in 77 and my father met me there a while later. That was the first time he'd had a holiday since I remember. And then when they finally sold the shop and they retired, well, then they went back and forth to Greece a few times.
And where did they retire to? What suburb?
Well, they still lived in Paddington for a while because what Dad did with the shop, it was 2-storey, like I said. So he had separated the upstairs from the downstairs and he was living upstairs. Although the council made him take that away, so now he's just staying in Croydon. But he comes and goes. He goes back to Greece every so often and comes back, to Australia and goes back to Greece.
Is your mother still alive?
Yeah, she's still going strong.
So together?
They're together, yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you?
I don't know, I'm trying to think. Let me see. We covered the Sydney Stadium, we covered up the road.
Big events?
Rathskeller's Bay, big events. Yeah, what sort of big events? Well, big events like I said with the guys on the moon, the Gypsy Moth. What other big events happened? The war. Musical events maybe, like Elvis Presley. He was great. Oh, you can see that? You want to pan onto that for a minute or what? All right. Yeah, I remember Elvis well. I remember the songs from, I remember from his early songs. For some reason I was addicted to him. When he finally died, I was 77. June, July, I was overseas. I was on there's a little village in Greece on an island out the back of nowhere, miles from any civilization, and I had a little radio there, and I heard the news on the radio, and I was just, from where I was to hear it, I mean, I cried, but to hear it out there especially, it was just so, and came back here, and I guess after the holiday, I don't know, and still didn't believe that it had happened. I had to read it in an Australian paper first. But no, watching, Elvis change and go through the music first, then the movies, which I never liked, and then he went back to his LA club scene, Las Vegas club scene, I guess. That was the worst period. Big events, movie stars, they don't seem to compare now to what they used to. You can't get a Gregory Peck or a Cary Grant or a Rock Hudson, Tom Cruise or Richard Gere or whoever. They don't stack up. They don't stack up, and none of the girls ever stacked up at Marilyn Monroe anyway.
Did you go to the movies a lot?
Yeah, I used to go to the movies. I remember paying, how much did we used to pay? Geez. Pre-decimal currency, must have been sixpence or a shilling or something to get in, and go and see.
What was your favourite?
I think it might have been the Godzilla movies. I think they were the ones, they were the way to go.
And what about your favourite song?
Well, I've got too many favourites to have one. Depends on the mood you're in, with music, I guess. Have to be definitely something rock and rolly, probably from the early 60s, if not before. Have to be an Elvis song, I guess. With the Blue Suede Shoes or Heartbreak Hotel or something like that. Or Roy Orbison. I remember Roy Orbison well.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you.
Oh, good. We finished.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks very much. It's come along, sort of like pack up, just sort of being dead tired and stowing everything in this car. But I was in Venice when we just got to Venice, and that's when the news came that Elvis came. Yeah, so I was sort of in the same part of the world. That's where I met my husband.
That's where we lived at Randwick. That's my father.
Yeah, I don't want to get here one.
Yeah. That'd be 59, 60.
And my husband's Canadian, and I met him in Madrid. Yeah. I remember I propositioned him. As I said, well, I'm going south. Why don't you come and see us?
Wow, definitely a good way to go, mate.
It was great.
I mean, yeah, certainly.
It was pretty safe.
This is his father.